So here is another weekly dose of unusual things that you can see in the garden here at Caerhays during lockdown. The gardens would have been closed by now in a normal year, but that's not to say that there aren't still exciting, rare and interesting things to see. And today we'll look at one or two of those. Behind me is a late flowering and small growing shrub called Magnolia globosa, and it has a white flower with just a hint of pink on the edge of the petals. This species comes both from India and from China, and this particular plant is Chinese. How do we know that? We know that because it has this gorgeous orangey indumentum on the new growth, and the underside of the leaf is also hairy or furry, if you like, with the same orange furs as you see on the new growth. The Indian form doesn't have any of this orange glow or orange furring or something like that, but it has instead a rather more glabrous or shiny effect, and it doesn't have these hairs on the underside of the leaves. If we look at some of the other magnolias that have rounded flowers like this, Magnolia sebaldii and Magnolia sinensis hang down. This Magnolia globosa, the flower points sideways, as you can see here. And if you look at some of the other flowers which have just gone over, you see they aren't out for very long, but there are still plenty of buds here when you look closely. That one won't be out for 3 or 4 days yet, but this bud up here won't be out probably for another 2 or 3 weeks. So you've got a reasonable flowering span. It's not a magnolia that comes out all at once, and it sets seed fairly quickly. And the seed hangs down and is bright orange when it's ripe, and is quite easily collectible if you can get here before the squirrels do. This is a shrub that wants to become multi-stemmed. It's not really a tree, and you can see how there are vigorous new shoots. In fact, the tallest bit of new growth comes from a side shoot nearly down at the base of the plant. Is this tender? A little bit. As you'd expect, I think the Indian form is possibly more tender because it comes from a hotter climate and a lower altitude. But we do grow both forms. But I think this one is easily the nicest, with the nicest flower. It was first brought into this country in 1919 and collected by George Forrest. But as a plant, it probably lives about 30, 35, 40 years, and this is a relatively new 20-year-old plant, the older, which we propagated from seed, the older plants having gradually died out of old age. So here is something really rather different, and for those of you who thought the rhododendron flowering season was over, here's rather a nice surprise. This is rhododendron pink polar bear. Now, some of you may be familiar with the white form of polar bear, which is strongly scented, as is this one, and usually flowers in July or August, sometimes even into September. This is a very early year, and pink polar bear is out quite a bit before the white form. Polar bear was is a cross between Rhododendron auriculatum, which is late flowering and white, and Rhododendron decorum, which is also fairly late flowering and white. But decorum has a pink form, and pink polar bear is therefore a cross between a pink form of decorum and auriculatum. The scent is very good. The plant has struggled a bit in the recent dry weather, but now we've had plenty of rain, it's off and away again, and where there isn't a flower, you can see a strong set of new growth. And as soon as these flowers are all over, really we'll want to take off and dehead them so they don't waste any energy producing seeds. Actually, there is a flower over here that is over, and what I'm going to do is literally just pinch off that flower head, and there you see a very tiny new growth bud which will now take up the energy from the plant and grow away, as well as that little twig is, because it had no flower, all the energy's gone into the new growth already. Pink polar bear, something that everyone ought to grow who loves rhododendrons. Another genus of plants which comes into its own in June are the Styrax. Styrax are a relatively small genus, and there are only about 14 or so species. And this year they've been flowering particularly badly. They're having a year off. Last year they produced enormous quantities of seeds and fruits, and this year they're not flowering terribly well. This is Styrax japonicus pendulus, and from a distance you might not think that there were very many flowers, but it's one of those beautiful trailing or weeping trees where you need to look up inside it to actually see the flowers. And if we look up in under, you see many of the flowers are actually hidden in underneath the foliage. But if we'll look a little more closely and sort of poke up a branch, you can see that there's a slight hint of pink, but basically these are white flowers in very large numbers. The normal Styrax japonicus grows into a tree, but this is the beautiful weeping form, which come November, all its leaves will go yellow, and it's a startling autumn colour effect. The bees love Styrax, but the scent is probably not particularly strong on this one. But you often see bees literally falling to the ground, having collected too much nectar and getting too covered in pollen for their own good. We're quite early in the morning here, so I can't see many bees operating yet, but I don't think it'll be very long when the sun gets up. So normally at this time of the year we'd have been looking at lots of different species of Styrax, but as I said, they flowered very poorly this year, and this is possibly the best of a poor season for Styrax. A little earlier we were looking at rhododendron pink polar bear, and here is one of the parents which I mentioned then. This is the pink form of Rhododendron decorum, which is really quite pink in bud, and then it fades to nearer white as it opens out more fully. The vast majority of Rhododendron decorums are pink, but are white, correction. But this is a pink form. These are very elderly plants put in the 1920s, and they're up now 20 feet, 25 feet in height, and they flower very late, and it's one of the great shows in the garden. Only one of the plants is still in flower, the others have flowered and gone over, but you can see how dramatic and attractive a flower that is. If we could get a bit closer, you would certainly smell it and certainly be able to enjoy it, but what a thing that is. Having said what I just did about Styrax flowering badly, we have suddenly come across one that really isn't flowering badly at all. And this is Styrax japonicus emerald pagoda, and it has the largest flowers of any of the different named forms of Styrax japonicus. There's a Japanese name for it which I can't pronounce, so I think emerald pagoda would probably do better. But if you just look up from underneath which is how you always have to look at Styrax. Every twig has got a huge flower hanging down. Every twig that is on the old wood, because Styrax flower on last year's old wood and not on this year's new growth, or this variety does anyway. But if you count if you look at the number of flowers on this small tree, which is only about 15 years old, you'll find that there are probably more flowers than there are leaves on the tree. And such is the weight of the flowers that one of the branches has snapped off in the recent gales and fallen onto the ground. And why did it collapse? Well, it collapsed because of the strong winds, but it collapsed because of the weight of the flowers. And as you can see on the ground, the flowers are just beginning to drop. But what an amazing show this little tree is putting on.